Clinton and Donald Trump targeting the key battleground states as the clock is ticking down toward Election Day. Yesterday, Mr. Trump hit several states, starting in historic Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, where he unveiled that plan for his first 100 days in office if he wins. Mrs. Clinton appeared in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, alongside her running mate, Senator Tim Kaine. And today, both campaigns swinging through other key states, Florida and North Carolina included, states that could prove decisive for the race for the White House. And hello, everyone, and welcome to America's election headquarters. I'm Eric Shaw.
Hi, Eric, and hello, everyone. I'm Marthel Neville. Well, Donald Trump will be holding a rally later in Florida, as Eric just mentioned, considered by many pundits to be a must-win for the Republican nominee, while Hillary Clinton is barnstorming across North Carolina. We have Fox team coverage. Rich Edson is standing by in Chappaqua, New York, Hillary Clinton's adopted hometown, for the latest on her campaign. But we begin with Peter Doocy covering Donald Trump live in front of Trump Tower right here in New York City. So, Peter, what is the Trump team saying about their battleground state strategy now that we are in the home stretch, 16 days left in this race?
Marthel, it's really interesting. This morning we heard from the Trump team just exactly how they think they can string together enough electoral college votes to win.
Our path is Florida, Ohio, Iowa, North Carolina. You add Nevada there, you protect Arizona and Georgia. You look at New Hampshire and Maine, too, where the congressional districts there are split in the way they award their electoral votes. And then we're also going to continue to visit Colorado, Virginia, Pennsylvania.
Trump's campaign manager, Kellyanne Conway, there also went on to say that she thinks Donald Trump is doing a lot better with early absentee ballots than previous Republican nominees. Marthel.
And Peter, before I let you go, I want to find out if you've heard any reaction from Mr. Trump about the two Americans who were just sentenced to prison in Iran.
We have, Marthel, and Donald Trump just tweeted about an hour and a half ago that he doesn't think the Iranians would be demanding what a lot of people are equating to ransom for the exchange of these Americans if he was president. So he went on social media and he wrote this, quote, "Well, Iran has done it again, taking two of our people and asking for a fortune for their release. This doesn't happen if I'm president." And it's interesting, Iran was also mentioned by the RNC chairman Reince Priebus when he was rattling off a list of reasons that he thinks Hillary Clinton is going to lose. There's also been a lot of talk the last few days, of course, about whether or not Donald Trump plans to accept the results of an election if he loses. And this morning we heard from his son Eric, who told ABC News that his dad will 100% go along with the result if they know for sure that everything was carried out fairly on November 8th. Marthel.
All right, Peter Doocy out there on the Trump campaign trail there in front of Trump Towers on Fifth Avenue. Peter Doocy, thank you so much. Eric?
Marthel, meanwhile, Mrs. Clinton is hitting the campaign trail today in North Carolina. That's where the Real Clear average of polls show that she is up by nearly 3 points. This as her campaign is also now expanding its focus to help those down-ballot Democrats. Rich Edson is live at Chappaqua, New York, by the Clintons' home with the very latest. So, Mrs. Clinton, Rich, obviously also trying to motivate President Obama's coalition that was so successful for him.
Good afternoon, Eric, and that's exactly the case in North Carolina this afternoon. She's doing so in a state that President Barack Obama won narrowly in 2008, lost narrowly in 2012. It has an African-American voting base of about 10 to 15%, and so she can motivate much of that base. It could very well make the difference in 2016. She's meeting later this afternoon with the mothers of the movement. Those are mothers whose children were killed in interactions with police officers. Earlier this month, she spoke at a largely African-American congregation there. That was following the police shooting death of a man there, an African-American man, and then the rioting and the protests that followed there. She arrives in North Carolina from Pennsylvania, where yesterday she criticized Donald Trump for Trump claiming he would appoint a special prosecutor to investigate her if he were elected president.
Every time Donald Trump says he wants to jail his opponent, meaning me, I think to myself, you know, we don't do that in America. We actually have laws and courts and an independent judiciary.
After North Carolina today, it's back up north. She heads to New Hampshire tomorrow to try to motivate the liberal base. She is campaigning with Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren there tomorrow, Eric.
And Rich, today's a lot of Democrats, or some are saying that they think they have a shot at taking over the Senate. They need 4 seats. But the House is another matter because you got a 30-seat gap there. What are they saying?
Right, and they're pushing for that. Campaign manager Robbie Mook today on Fox News Sunday just a couple of hours ago acknowledged that the Clinton campaign is helping with resources in governor's races and Senate races. He noted Indiana and Missouri. And Clinton is also wrapping in many of those down-ballot races in the events that she's holding herself. Yesterday in Pennsylvania, she campaigned and tried to help Katie McGinty. She's the Democrat running against Pat Toomey there, the Republican incumbent senator. Tried to tie Toomey to Donald Trump there. The Real Clear Politics average of polling puts Toomey up by about a couple of percentage points. Today, we expect much of the same in North Carolina. There's another contested close race there for the U.S. Senate. Incumbent Senator Richard Burr is running against Deborah Ross there, the Democratic challenger. There's about a 3 percentage point favor there in the Real Clear Politics average of polling for Richard Burr in that state. And as you mentioned, they need 4 Senate seats, the Democrats, and the White House to take control of the Senate, 30 to reclaim control of the House. Eric?
All right, Rich, and we'll be talking about and examining whether or not the House and the Senate, neither or both, are going to flip a little later on in our newscast. Rich, thank you.
And this is a Fox News alert. Defense Secretary Ash Carter is visiting northern Iraq today as fierce fighting continues in Mosul. Carter is in Erbil, which is about an hour away from Mosul, for a closer look at the battle raging in Iraq's second largest city. Carter today speaking about the role of American troops in the Mosul offensive.
Whether they're flying airplanes overhead or whether they're advising units on the ground, even behind the front lines, they are at risk. It's also important that everybody understands that we must do this. We have to protect ourselves from ISIL. They intend harm to our country.
And foreign correspondent Connor Powell is live from our Middle East Bureau with more. Connor?
Yeah, Arthel, Ash Carter meeting with Kurdish Peshmerga forces leaders today in Erbil, but those Kurdish forces saying that they've captured yet another town outside of Mosul. The town of Bishika is only 10 miles outside of Mosul, and it's yet another town that Kurdish forces and Iraqi forces have taken control of. It represents a big mark in terms of this operation. It removes a significant area in terms of a roadblock, an obstacle for Iraqi forces to push into there, though fierce fighting does continue in many parts outside of Mosul. And right now, Iraqi forces have yet to push into that main city. They're continually trying to take control, to clear obstacles, to clear roadside bombs and IEDs from the surrounding areas, and that continues. How many casualties the Iraqi forces have taken so far is a bit unknown. We know at least 25 Kurdish forces have been killed and some Iraqis have been killed, but they seem to be making a lot of progress without too many deaths so far, and that's important because Iraqi forces are trying to move slowly, trying to do this without a lot of damage to the infrastructure in Mosul and the surrounding areas. They want to keep as much of the infrastructure in place. Now, Secretary Carter said while they are, U.S. officials are sort of downplaying the success, saying that this still will take a long time, they are stressing that Iraqi forces are making a significant amount of progress as they push in, that things are going better than they had originally had thought, but this operation is going to take a while. It is going to take some time, but they are making significant progress. Now, one hiccup on this entire operation, though, Arthel, is there is still this unresolved dispute with the Turkish forces that have taken up some space in Iraq. About 500 or so, maybe 1,000 Kurdish forces and Turkish forces, rather, have actually moved into Iraq. They want to be part of this operation. The Iraqis and the Kurds do not want Turkey to have any troops inside Mosul, Arthel.
Yeah, it definitely remains a complicated situation there for sure. Connor Powell, thanks so much, Connor.
Well, if Mosul is liberated and ISIS is defeated there, what next? Former U.S. Ambassador John Bolton joins us now. He's a former ambassador to the United Nations, Fox News contributor and senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Ambassador, always good to see you. Do you think the strategy that seems to be working will be successful?
Well, it may be working in the sense that Iraqi and Kurdish forces are advancing in and around Mosul, but it's taken 2 years to get to this point. And I would have to say, if you look at the shrinking territory in Iraq that ISIS has withdrawn from, they have retreated over the past year or so in pretty good order. and they've exfiltrated already significant numbers of their forces inside Mosul, and those who are there for their extremist religious reasons, I suspect, are prepared to fight to the end. I think tactically the fall of Mosul is only a question of time. The issue of how many innocent civilians will be killed and how many buildings will be left standing, and the overall casualties, though, very much up in the air. The bigger strategic picture is that if the Iraqi government resumes control of what used to be the country's second largest city, it will be a defeat for ISIS, but it will be a victory for Iran, because the Iraqi government today is functionally a satellite of the government of Iran, and it demonstrates, in my view, why the Obama administration's strategy for defeating ISIS is fundamentally flawed.
And in your view, what does that mean if indeed Iraq, as you say, is a satellite of Tehran?
Well, the Ayatollahs in Tehran for quite some time have been trying to expand their influence into an arc of power from Iran through a controlled government in Baghdad, the Assad regime in Syria, Hezbollah in Lebanon. And they're opposed to ISIS, obviously, because it's a direct threat to their interests there. That's why I think the United States strategy should have been to, with Arab allies, with the Kurds for sure, and in some way getting the Turks involved, if that were possible, consistent with aiding the Kurds, to defeat ISIS that way. This is not a two-sided war. As you just heard from Connor Powell, the Turks are in opposition to the Kurds and the Iraqi government as well as to ISIS. This is about a 5- or 6-sided war. And our strategy should have been defeat ISIS as quickly and as decisively as possible in a way that minimizes the upside for Iran. Instead, we're doing a slow roll strategy against ISIS that, if successful, will maximize the benefit to Iran.
And the threat of Iran and the danger of Tehran controlling that. Let me show you what the Washington Post says today about what we may need to do and what we face in this country going forward if indeed Mosul falls. Here's the editorial saying, ultimately, victory over terrorist forces in Iraq will require a sustained American presence, both military and civilian, extending well beyond the liberation of Mosul. The president should be laying the groundwork for that now so that his successor can avoid Mr. Obama's signal mistake in Iraq, a premature and self-defeating withdrawal. That, of course, a reference to his not being able to, because of the status of forces agreement, he said, keep 10,000 troops, which, you know, Donald Trump says spawned ISIS in the first place.
Well, sustained American presence in Iraq, how's that for a theory that's about 5 years too late? Look, I don't think Obama was thwarted in efforts to keep American forces in Iraq by failure to reach a status of forces agreement. I think the failure to agree on a SOFA was just the pretext for him to get our forces out, which was his real objective right along. And interestingly, Hillary Clinton, although as usual her stand comes in a number of different formulations designed for the audience she's speaking to, has basically said no boots on the ground in Iraq, which would directly contradict the advice she's getting from the Washington Post. So I think Obama may not withdraw Americans before January the 20th, but if you listen to Hillary Clinton, if what she says in this campaign means anything, I believe she will.
Well, finally, I mean, there are boots on the ground. 4,800 troops, 100 special ops. And I want to pay tribute now to Navy Petty Officer Jason Finnan. He was 34 years old. He leaves a 12-year-old son, Christopher, and a wife. He's from Anaheim, California. He lost his life on Thursday by an IED. He was a bomb ordnance specialist. These are the brave men and women who are out there on the ground now, Ambassador, facing ISIS. And so far, there have been 4 American casualties facing the group.
Yeah, these Americans really have died in the service of their country. This is the way Americans are. Even though they're supposed to be advising and assisting the Iraqi forces, you can bet they're out there leading from the front when they can. And I really think honesty to the American people dictates we get a new formulation when people say, well, there won't be boots on the ground. As you say, there are American boots on the ground. They're out there risking their lives for our country, and we need to be more respectful of the dangers that they face in Iraq and in Syria and elsewhere around the world while we're on the subject.
And we salute them, anyone who's in harm's way, and we thank them. Ambassador, thank you as always. Good to see you.
Thank you, Eric.
Of course. Arthel?
Indeed we do, Eric. Thank you so much. Meanwhile, renewed fighting in the Syrian city of Aleppo. Activists say there has been an increase in shelling today between rebel fighters and government forces. Now, this comes after the expiration of Russia's 3-day humanitarian ceasefire. We're learning that temporary truce was not successful in allowing rescue workers to deliver supplies to the families who were trapped there. Election Day is still more than 2 weeks away, but many Americans have already cast their ballots. What we're learning as early voting gets underway. Plus, as the clock ticks down in the race, the candidates are hitting and setting their sights on key swing states. A closer look at their strategies in the home stretch. Officials in Pennsylvania say so far there is no sign a water supply source has been contaminated after flooding from a storm ruptures a gas pipeline. Now that breaks sending 55,000 gallons of gas into a tributary north of Harrisburg. This image here shows where a sudden deluge of rain wiped out a bridge at the site of the spill, and crews are waiting for the water to recede so they can get to the pipe. The storm blowing into the western and central areas of the state on Friday, an estimated 7 inches of rain triggering mudslides, damaging homes and killing one person when a tree fell on a house.
We know with just over 2 weeks before Election Day, early voting is in full swing in about a dozen states. And now the first wave of numbers coming in, giving us a glimpse of the state of the race on this Sunday. Garrett Tenney is live in Washington with more details. So, Garrett, what did the early voting turnout indicate?
Well, Eric, every election we see a greater number of Americans are casting their votes before election day. This year, early voting could account for as much as 40% of all votes cast. Already, more than 5.3 million votes have come in across the country, many of them in crucial swing states like North Carolina. Now, in 2012, when Mitt Romney narrowly won the Tar Heel state, Republicans held a wide margin over Democrats in the number of mail-in ballots that were sent in. The Clinton campaign is feeling confident this time around, though, because that lead is much slimmer. And since in-person voting began on Thursday, Democrats are now leading in the number of votes cast overall.
We believe over 40% of voters in the battleground states are going to turn out before Election Day. So this election is happening as we speak, and that ground game is there pushing our people out.
In Ohio, historically, Democrats have been very strong in early voting. Currently, though, there are concerning signs for the Clinton campaign. The number of requests for early ballots are down significantly in several heavily Democratic counties, such as Cuyahoga and Franklin, that are near Cleveland and Columbus. Now, another encouraging sign for the Trump campaign is the makeup of those who are requesting ballots. The share of white voters is up, who Trump traditionally does well with in the polls. The share of black voters who tend to vote Democrat in Ohio is down.
We look at some of the early voting returns in places like Iowa and Ohio, and we're doing much better than previous candidates, in large part because we invested in the absentee ballot early voting procedures.
And we should point out that at this point, the numbers we have, it's a very small sample of the total votes that will be cast overall, but it does give us a glimpse, as you mentioned, into where the race stands. This next week, voters in 10 more states will start to cast their ballots. Both campaigns are continuing to hit the ground hard to try and convince folks to get out and vote early. Eric?
Yeah, it's no longer Election Day. It's really election month in our country in many places. Thank you, Garrett. Arthel?
That's true, Eric and Garrett. So with a little more than 2 weeks away until Election Day, the presidential race turning into a chess match as both candidates hit the trail hard in key battleground states. Jamie Weinstein is here. He's the senior writer for the Daily Caller and host of the Jamie Weinstein Show podcast. And Jamie, good to see you.
Good to see you.
Absolutely. Before I start giving you my questions, I want to go here. I want to show a recent Real Clear Politics poll, because that's where Garrett Tenney was talking about lots going on there in Ohio with the early voting. You can see here that Clinton has 44%, with Trump in the lead, a small lead there at 44.6%. And as you know, Ohio with 18 electoral votes, Jamie, Clinton, as we're showing here, she's closing in on Trump, but he's still in the lead there in Ohio. So, you know, besides an endorsement from LeBron James, as well as personally campaigning, now that was huge. I mean, he's the king, you know, and they're the champs. So, yeah. And besides campaigning there herself, how does, though, Hillary Clinton beat Trump in Ohio? And on the other side, what policy promises does Trump need to pound out in Ohio to win that state?
Well, Trump has been hitting on those themes about trade and bringing back jobs, manufacturing jobs, and that might resonate in some places in Ohio, which saw factories shut down, and they blame free trade for that. But Ohio is one of Trump's success stories right now. If you look at all the swing states, he's not doing very well in many places. But Ohio and Iowa are places where he has at least small leads over Clinton. Mm-hmm. So what you're showing right here is one of the bright spots for Trump. But there are really very few bright spots if you look across all the swing states.
Well, I want to go to another swing state, and that's Pennsylvania. I want to show you another recent Real Clear Politics poll there, with Clinton 46.4% to Donald Trump's 40.2% there. I mean, Pennsylvania, 20 electoral votes. Trump made 2 stops there yesterday. Clinton and Tim Kaine together also made 2 stops, Pittsburgh and Philly. Pennsylvania voted Democrat, as you well know, in the last 6 elections. So it's Clinton's to lose. Where is Hillary Clinton, though, vulnerable in Pennsylvania?
Well, Trump has hoped that he would be able to build a coalition of white working-class voters across the Rust Belt, from Ohio to Pennsylvania into Michigan and Wisconsin. So this is what his campaign has been hoping to flip Pennsylvania, which, as you mentioned, is a state that's voted Democrat for as long as I can remember. But, you know, as you mentioned, Hillary Clinton has a strong lead there. It's very hard to see how, at this late hour, Trump flipping that 6-point lead. But he really does need that state if he's going to have any chance of winning this presidential election.
All right, let's go to Virginia now. 13 electoral votes there. Another battleground state where Clinton is in the lead. Trump is competing. He's campaigning there. Yesterday, he was in Virginia Beach, reaching out to the traditionally very reliable voting bloc for the Republicans, the evangelical vote. So, Jamie, I ask you, how do the allegations of sexual misconduct ring through that group, or will it matter?
I think it hurts him everywhere, not just in Virginia. Virginia is a state that's been trending over time more Democratic. Obama had won that state in 2012. So it is a state that's been traditionally competitive. Hillary Clinton picked Tim Kaine there as her VP, obviously a native son of Virginia, and that helped a lot. But this state looks like it's trending towards Hillary Clinton. And in fact, there was some reports a couple weeks ago that the Trump campaign had moved some of their assets out of the state, almost conceding it to the Clinton campaign.
Yes or no? Is the race over, Jamie?
It's pretty close. If you want to expand the swing states, you look at Texas is now becoming a swing state, which is a state that never is in play. But there's now two polls that show Hillary Clinton within 3 points there. So, you know, the map of swing states is expanding, but not in the direction that Donald Trump likes. It's states that go traditionally Republican looking towards Hillary Clinton. So it's a very rough map for Donald Trump.
All right, Jamie Weinstein, we've got to leave it there. Always good to talk to you. Take care. Eric?
Oh, I thought we were going to have a lot more on the state of this race in a few moments. Tennessee Congresswoman Marsha Blackburn will be here. She is a Donald Trump surrogate. We've got her thoughts on how Trump is doing and ask her about Mrs. Clinton's charge that Mr. Trump is, quote, a threat to our democracy. Plus, the Clinton campaign dealing yet again with another document dumped from WikiLeaks. What their Clinton staffers reportedly said behind the scenes about race relations and African-American outreach, and how Donald Trump is reacting.
John Podesta said of Hillary, she has bad instincts. She's been there for 30 years, and what has she fixed? Nothing. She unleashed death, destruction, and failure in every country she touched it.
Well, the Clinton campaign pushing back against new pay-to-play allegations after WikiLeaks has released more of those so-called Podesta emails. The documents purportedly hacked from the account of her campaign manager, John Podesta, and they appear to show that Mrs. Clinton helped negotiate a $12 million foundation donation from the King of Morocco. All that in exchange for holding a Clinton Global Initiative meeting there. Molly Hannenberg has the very latest on what WikiLeaks is supposedly showing us from Washington. Hi, Molly.
Hi, Eric. Hillary Clinton's campaign manager says it was not the appearance of pay for play, as Donald Trump suggests, that led Hillary Clinton to back out of a planned speech in Morocco in 2015. It was rather an issue of timing. New WikiLeaks documents show Hillary Clinton's aides discussing her plan for the King of Morocco to give $12 million to the Clinton Global Initiative, that's the family charity, in exchange for the charity holding a meeting in Morocco in 2015 and Hillary Clinton speaking there. Bill and Chelsea Clinton ended up attending the event, but Hillary did not.
I didn't want anything on her schedule that was going to distract from the campaign. And again, the Clinton Global Initiative had this meeting scheduled in Morocco.
But it was the big money from a foreign person to the foundation at the time she's running for president.
This was, as you can see in those emails, this was a scheduling matter, and we didn't want her going overseas. I didn't want her going overseas before the campaign was kicking off.
Also today, other new WikiLeaks documents show the Clinton campaign trying to figure out if Hillary Clinton was losing too much black voter support to Bernie Sanders and if she needed to do a major race speech. Chief speechwriter Dan Schwerin wrote to other top campaign officials in February 2016 talking about how there had been conversations with Bill and Hillary Clinton about what a speech would cover, and that, quote, Bill and Hillary Clinton were, quote, quite clear that this should not be a mea culpa, but they shouldn't try to, quote, defend the indefensible. Schwerin also says another advisor was concerned that a speech could unintentionally introduce other information potentially damaging, including the term, quote, super predator, to a lot more voters. Super predator is the term then First Lady Hillary Clinton used in 1996 to describe gangs. Many African Americans consider it offensive, and she has since apologized for using the term. Eric?
All right, Molly, thanks so much. Arthel?
All right, Eric and Molly, Hillary Clinton slamming Donald Trump as dangerous after the Republican nominee refused to say during Wednesday's debate where he'd respect the outcome of the election. Here's Mrs. Clinton last night.
In that third debate, Donald Trump said something that no other candidate running on either side has ever said, and that is he refused to say he would respect the outcome of the election. This poses a direct threat to our democracy. I've lost elections. You don't feel good the next day, but we've always had a peaceful transfer of power.
And joining me now, Republican Congresswoman from Tennessee, Marsha Blackburn. She is also a Donald Trump surrogate. Congresswoman, very nice to have you here.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, let's start here in Hillary Clinton's claim that, Donald Trump is trying to interfere with our democracy. And as we know, that low voter turnout usually is not good for Democrats. Congresswoman, is it fair to ask, is Donald Trump somehow trying to deter people from voting, or might there be another reason for his drumbeat of a rigged election system?
I don't think Donald Trump is trying to deter anyone from voting. You could look at the record numbers of individuals who self-proclaimed as Republicans and came out and voted in the Republican primary simply so they could support him, whether they were a Democrat or an independent. So I don't think that that is it at all. Quite the opposite may be true. You know, Arthel, I have come to see that when the Clintons start talking about it, it seems that that's something that they may be a little bit guilty of.
You're suggesting that perhaps that they somehow, or what do you mean by that, Congresswoman? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
I think, Arthel, that when you look at it, that they understand they need to get their voters out, and they would hope that a lot of Trump supporters do not come out. And we know we have a peaceful transfer of power in this country, and we're going to see that again. And these are two candidates who are trying to appeal to their base, to get their base out, and at the same time win over those independent voters that are going to decide the outcome of this election. Many of those individuals in the battleground states.
And then, well, Congresswoman, to your point, if that is in fact what Donald Trump is trying to do, as well as Mrs. Clinton, to get those voters out there, new voters in particular, how does Trump's messaging galvanize those new voters that could help him win the election?
I think his speech yesterday is what is galvanizing. And people know that when you talk about things that are a threat to the nation, you can look at Ms. Clinton's actions, her actions on Benghazi, the actions that are being borne out with the emails, the actions that you have seen with what has happened in the Middle East, the disruption there with Syria, what has happened with Iran. And those are things that pose other threats. Syrian refugees and bringing in additional refugees. Now, Arthel, those are things that voters are looking at and saying, oh my goodness, this is something that is not good for the health and stability of this country. Looking at $20 trillion worth of debt and hearing about adding more of an annual deficit to that accrued debt every year. And focusing on those issues are where voters are right now, and they're trying to decide who is going to be better for the future of our country. And I think that's what people are honing in on.
Yeah, and Congresswoman, you did such a fantastic job, of course. I mean, you're an experienced politician and, you know, have a great career, but you did that so well. And I think that's what voters are wanting to hear from Donald Trump. He gave he presented a clear outline of his first 100 days in office in his Gettysburg speech, but then he also threatened to sue the women who have claimed unwanted sexual advances by Trump. I mean, so does he keep overshadowing the stronger aspect of his speech and then not outlining those reasons why you should not vote for Hillary Clinton?
I think at this point in time, people are tired of hearing the attacks. They're tired of hearing about things that are not specific to the issues that they're concerned about. So many times, Arthel, we will hear people say, you know, politicians just don't get it. These elections are not about them. These elections are about us, we the people. And there's never been a year more perfectly suited for that message. This is a year where the people of this country are saying, look, we want this country back on the right track. That's why it's been an outsider year. They want things done differently, and they really have a different set of deliverables for this elections than many of the past elections.
And Congressman, I'm short on time, but I will have to ask you this because, again, you laid out some great messaging for your candidate. Will we hear Donald Trump in the next 16 days speak directly to those issues that the voters want to hear about, the things that affect them and not so much him or his campaign or Hillary and her campaign?
Yes, you're going to see more focus on all of those action items that are laid out for the first 100 days. It's exciting to hear a plan of action with specifics. This is what we're going to do on day one. These are things we're going to begin to put in process. And that gives those of us who are in Congress the opportunity to say, okay, let's work together to get this done and get the country on the back track, to roll back Obamacare, begin some tax reforms, make certain that we are securing our borders.
Okay, Congresswoman Marsha Blackburn, again, it was a pleasure to talk to you, and let's see if your candidate can stay on those messages that you just laid out so well.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Well, you know, Arthel, the election is not even over, and we're told that Hillary Clinton is already looking past Donald Trump, focusing on helping House and Senate Democrats. Will they sweep the Senate? And could the Democrats take the House? We'll look at the odds straight ahead.
We have a Fox News alert regarding a deadly two-car collision involving a semi-truck and a tour bus. It's happening about 5:20 this morning, local time there on the I-10, which is west of Indian Avenue in Desert Hot Springs. This is, again, 5:20 this morning. Fox News can confirm at this point 7 people, unconfirmed actually, though, 7 dead in this crash. Unfortunately, this number could change which could go up. But this is all, by the way, all westbound lanes there are closed. There are multiple injuries. Again, at least 7 deaths at this point. We do have a crew at the scene. We're going to bring you as much information as we can get, as quickly as we can get it into our newsroom. But again, a deadly car crash involving 2 cars, a semi-truck, and a tour bus on the I-10 in Desert Hot Springs, California.
And now back to politics. Hillary Clinton feeling the wind at her back in light of her recent strong poll numbers against Donald Trump. Perhaps she is sensing victory for her could be at hand, as her campaign now is also focusing on the so-called down-ballot races, looking to help those Democrats retake the Senate and possibly, some think, even the House. Could Congress flip? Nan Hayworth is a former Republican congresswoman from New York. Dennis Kucinich, former Democratic congressman from Ohio and a Fox News contributor. Welcome to you both. Nan, let me start with you. I mean, let's look at the Senate first. The Democrats only need 4 seats. Do you think that Republican control is in jeopardy in the Senate?
Clearly it is, Eric, and we can see that in so many races that have been very well defined across the country. This is a year in which people are justifiably very frustrated with Washington. They're very frustrated with the state of the economy. They look at incumbents of both parties and say it's time for a change. Republican incumbents whom I'd like to see return to the Senate and the House are in some jeopardy because of this mood. So it's very important for Republicans to remember and for voters across the country to remember that it's the economic message that every Republican is promoting, including the presidential candidate Donald Trump. You know, we need to reactivate our economy. We need to have real relief from bad taxes, heavy taxes, bad regulations, and only the Republican candidates across the country are supporting the things that will make all of us feel better.
You talk about the frustration against Washington. What about the anger and frustration against Donald Trump?
Well, I think, again, it's very important. He gave an important speech yesterday in Gettysburg, and he did lay out his economic plan in detail. It will be a plan that will increase opportunity and prosperity for everybody. All Republicans down the ballot have to concentrate on those things, and Mr. Trump has to respect that in every state and in every district, as Dennis and I both know, there are particular concerns that mean that candidates, even though we share a party, may have to have a very different approach.
Dennis, I see you nodding. Is it, as Nan says, frustration at Washington, or is it Donald Trump's fault?
Well, first of all, you have to remember in the primaries, people in both parties, about half of Americans wanted to just throw the established parties overboard. And that's worth remembering because that mood is still out there in the country. People want dramatic change. They don't want more of the same. That's why candidates have to listen closely. At a district level, most Congress people try to stay close to the people. If they don't last long. But I would say that in this election, what people are looking for are candidates who are going to identify the economic issues that people care about, jobs, health care, education, retirement security, and have a plan to do something about it.
And do you think the Senate will flip? Do you think the House, Dennis, can change? But they have 30. There's a 30-seat gap in the House.
I think, you know, the Senate's probably very close right now. The House, I don't know. There are a lot of seats in the House that were decided through redistricting years ago. I think that we're looking at a government that will be divided. We're certainly looking at a country which will be divided, but we cannot expect both political parties to come together and start holding hands if it means more war, trade deals that take away American jobs. There's a lot that remains to be determined between now and the election.
And Nan, quickly, because we're out of time, Senate yes, but House no?
House is going to stay Republican. I agree with Dennis. And you know what? They're great servants of the people. Paul Ryan is an American hero in my eyes, so we need to keep that majority, and we need to have every Republican up and down the ballot working together and concentrating on positive messages of economic prosperity and opportunity.
All right. I'm sure that Dennis would agree that that's the same message for the Democrats. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Get ready for some peanuts and Cracker Jacks. Most Chicago Cub fans weren't even alive the last time the team went to the World Series. That's happening now, though.
A day after laying out his plan for the first 100 days of a Trump presidency, the Republican presidential candidate's team shuts down any talk of losing the election.
We're not giving up. We know we can win this, and we are certainly not acceding to the same chattering class that's been wrong about Donald Trump for about a year and a half.
Hillary Clinton hitting the campaign trail on a swing through the swing states as her campaign played defense today over more hacked emails from WikiLeaks.
I can't even verify any of the information that you have there. We simply don't have enough time as a campaign to
I promise you,
sort
if
through all these documents.
if these were not true, you'd tell us.
And it may be 16 days before Election Day, but millions of Americans have already cast their ballots. We're going to find out where and hear from voters who are dealing with those very long lines. And thank you for spending your Sunday with us. I'm Elizabeth Pran, in for Shannon Bream.
Nice to have you along. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being here at home. I'm Leland Vittert. Welcome to America's election headquarters from Washington.
All right, a very sad Fox News alert. At least 13 people have died in a tour bus crash in Southern California. This is according to the Riverside County Coroner's Office. They also say at least 30 people have been injured. California Highway Patrol says the bus collided with a tractor trailer on Interstate 10 in Desert Hot Springs. Rescue crews are on the scene right now searching for more victims. But as of now, all westbound lanes of I-10 are closed. Of course, we're going to continue to keep an eye on this story. We're going to update you on any breaking news as it develops, as we still are getting new information. And back to politics. With just 16 days to go, the presidential candidates are hitting the campaign trail for a battleground blitz. Donald Trump will hold a rally tonight in Florida where voters begin casting ballots tomorrow. Our own Peter Ducey is outside Trump campaign headquarters in New York City with the very latest. Hi, Peter.
Hi, Elizabeth. Donald Trump today unearthed an 8-year-old quote from the person, attributed to the person that many Democrats and analysts now see as Hillary Clinton's most effective surrogate. That would be the First Lady. Trump tweeted this, quote, "If you can't run your own house, you certainly can't run the White House." A statement made by Mrs. Obama about crooked Hillary Clinton. Also this morning, Trump's son went on ABC to hit the Democratic ticket for anemic crowd sizes.
Look at last night. I'll give you a perfect example. Look at last night. He was in Cleveland. He had 10,000 people in Cleveland. You know, Hillary and Tim Kaine, they were in Pennsylvania. They had 600 people in a gym. I mean, the enthusiasm levels are just totally off the charts.
Also this morning, campaign manager Kellyanne Conway said the Republican path to Electoral College victory depends mostly on strong finishes in Florida, Ohio, Iowa, North Carolina, and Nevada. And Conway says she sees reasons to be encouraged by some of the numbers buried beneath the surface, because it is possible, she says, well, we know it's possible for them to see what party somebody belongs to when they mail in an early absentee ballot, and the Trump team has been tracking those stats in swing states, and think they're in great shape.
We look at some of the early voting returns in places like Iowa and Ohio, and we're doing much better than previous candidates, in large part because we invested in the absentee ballot early voting procedures. And also, I think he does it in the way that he gave the speech in Gettysburg yesterday, puts out that 9 or 10 point plan, has some really significant measures with teeth.
And she mentioned that plan, the 100-day plan of action that Donald Trump rolled out yesterday in Pennsylvania. Now he's on a tour of swing states telling voters in, so far, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Virginia, and tonight, Florida, that the big idea for the next 2 weeks is that he is a practical businessman with outsider experience, and Hillary Clinton is not, so that the choice is theirs. Elizabeth?
All right, Peter, officially a sprint to the finish line. Thank you so much.
And during that sprint, voters have already begun casting their ballots in many states, including North Carolina. Early voting began on Thursday, and that is where Hillary Clinton heads today, holding rallies in Durham and Charlotte. You might remember President Obama won the Tar Heel state in 2008, but it went red in 2012, making it a true swing state. Rich Edson following the Clinton campaign from Mrs. Clinton's hometown in Chappaqua, New York. Hi, Rich.
Hey, good afternoon, Leland. And the Clinton campaign and Democrats are focusing on Congress. This is if Hillary Clinton wins the presidency. Democrats need only 4 Senate seats to take control of the Senate, 30 House seats to take control of the House. Campaign manager Robbie Mook said earlier today on Fox News Sunday that the campaign is helping some gubernatorial and Senate candidates with resources in states like Indiana and Missouri, though he does say that the campaign, at least on the presidential level, is not quite a runaway. Clinton is trying to tie Republican Senate candidates to the Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump and is acknowledging that they are also looking a bit beyond the presidential race.
As we're traveling in these last 17 days, we're going to be emphasizing the importance of electing Democrats down the ballot. We're going to get to work the day after the election and do everything possible to be prepared on January 20th to start doing the business of the American people.
Yesterday, the Clinton campaign was in Pennsylvania. Clinton campaigned for Katie McGinty. She's the Democrat running for Senate there against the Republican incumbent, Senator Pat Toomey. The Real Clear Politics average of polling there shows that Toomey has a couple of percentage point lead. Meanwhile, in North Carolina, where Clinton will be today, Richard Burr, the Republican incumbent, he's running against Deborah Ross. Burr, tight race there, 3 percentage point lead according to the same average of polling. Clinton attended church in North Carolina this morning and is scheduled to meet with the mothers of the movement a little bit later today. Those are women who have lost children through interactions with police officers. Earlier this month, Clinton was in North Carolina also, in Charlotte. She spoke to a largely African-American congregation there. This was after the police shooting and killing of an African-American man there led to protests in riots in Charlotte. You talked a bit about this at the beginning there, Leland. 2008, North Carolina, President Obama narrowly wins that state. 2012, President Obama narrowly loses that state in that election. About 10 to 15% of the electorate there is African-American. Certainly enough to sway the results in such a tight race. Back to you.
Well, making turnout all the more important, not only in absentee ballots, but also in terms of early voting. Rich Edson, Chappaqua, New York. Thanks, Rich. Liz?
As we continue our coverage of the Democratic campaign, another surprise for the Clinton campaign this weekend as WikiLeaks releases more of the so-called Podesta emails, the documents purportedly hacked from the account of her campaign chairman, John Podesta, appearing to show that Mrs. Clinton helped negotiate a $12 million foundation donation from the King of Morocco in exchange for holding a Clinton Global Initiative meeting there. Our own Molly Hendenberg has the very latest from here in Washington. Hi, Molly.
Hi, Elizabeth. Hillary Clinton's campaign manager says she did not end up giving that planned speech in Morocco in May 2015 because of upcoming campaign events, even though, according to WikiLeaks, it was Hillary's idea for the charity to hold a meeting in Morocco in exchange for $12 million from the King of Morocco.
There's a meeting in Morocco. Secretary Clinton decided not to go, focus on her campaign here. And again, we're having this discussion because the Russians want us to.
Went, correct?
My understanding is that they did go, but she did not. And again, this is the discussion the Russians want us to be having. They stole this information. They're selectively leaking.
Donald Trump says it's another example of pay for play. And his son says the WikiLeaks documents are revealing what Team Clinton really thinks of some Americans.
I think you also see their true colors in these WikiLeaks emails where they're going out making fun of Christians, making fun of evangelicals, making fun of needy Latinos. When Donna Brazile is giving debate questions to Hillary ahead of time. I mean, George, you know us for a long time. Could you imagine what would happen if my father got the debate questions?
Meanwhile, new leaked documents show the Clinton campaign back in February debating whether she should give a speech on race to help shore up black voters for her and not for Bernie Sanders. According to top speechwriter Dan Schwerin, one advisor was concerned about such a speech, writing, quote, "It's possible that we would unintentionally end up elevating questions that aren't yet being widely asked and introduce new damaging information, especially super predator, to a lot more voters." Super predator is the term then First Lady Hillary Clinton used in 1996 to describe gangs. Many African Americans consider it offensive, and she has since apologized for using the term. Clinton did not end up giving a race speech during the primary. Elizabeth?
All right, Molly Hennig reporting live. Molly, thank you so much. So let's bring in our panel for some reaction. Ian Pryor is the communications director for American Crossroads, and Mark Levine is a radio show host and a member of the Virginia House of Delegates. Both of them have joined us on this program, and we're happy to have you both back. Ian, I want to start with you because I think I can predict Mark's reaction to this. We just saw Molly's report about those WikiLeaks developments. I want to ask you, do you think folks are getting fatigued by this drip of information, or do you think this is relevant and voters, especially those who haven't made up their minds, are really listening to what we're learning?
Well, you know, I do think it's relevant, but I think here's ultimately the problem. Donald Trump needed to make this election about Hillary Clinton from the very beginning. And he really hasn't been able to do that over the past 3 weeks, and Hillary Clinton has really been able to make it about Donald Trump. So the problem is for Trump is that all the focus is on him right now. So when you get these WikiLeaks, when you get this drip of information, it's really not feeding into the narrative that the media is talking about, which is Donald Trump. So unless there's going to be some big bombshell that specifically links Hillary Clinton with either an email or latches on to her email controversy with the FBI, I think it's going to continue to get buried, and it's not going to have the kind of impact that I think it maybe should.
But, you know, I want to expand on that a little bit, and I want to bring in Mark, because on some of the issues that we see with Donald Trump, the Clinton campaign is actually fairly silent. You know, they're not necessarily capitalizing on it. Is that a strategy?
I think it is. I think when your opponent is putting himself on fire and dousing himself with gasoline, you let it happen. I mean, Donald Trump in his last 100 days is now saying he's going to sue the 11 women that have come forward with documented, you know, evidence that he sexually assaulted them. He's putting the focus on them. That's not a smart strategy, and I think that's something Republicans and Democrats agree on. So if Donald Trump is ruining his own campaign, I think it's smart of Hillary to stay back.
Okay, but and I want to continue with you, Mark. We see her focusing on down ballot races. We also see her focusing in states such as Arizona. That sort of gives us maybe that she's feeling fairly confident. Should she be feeling so confident right now?
Well, the polls do show her ahead, and certainly no time in American history has anyone come back from this far. But the down-ballot races matter. Who controls the Senate matters. So I think she's very smart to focus on that. Anything can happen. There's no reason to be complacent. It's interesting, Donald Trump is saying the election's rigged, so I guess he's telling his supporters, you know, don't bother to vote, you can't win anyway. But on the Democratic side, we're definitely pulling out and pushing everyone we can to vote.
Okay, well, you talked about her being ahead in polls. I want to shift gears and bring Ian in, because we have heard the thought that perhaps some of Donald Trump voters, you know, they're not getting polled. They're silent voters. They're not getting represented, and that we're all going to be surprised on November 8th when all said and done, and he ends up winning. Is that something that you think is a possibility, Ian?
Well, look, I think anything's possible at this point. I think if you look at the swing states, you know, not the national polls, but the states that Trump needs to win, Ohio, Florida, North Carolina, Nevada, these are close races. This isn't an 8-point race. This isn't a 9-point race. We're talking about 2-3 points. And in some places, like Ohio, Trump may even have the lead. So, you know, I do think that we have to look and see at the intensity of the Trump voters. How are they going to come out on Election Day? You know, are they going to be more enthusiastic than the Clinton voters? And going to the down ballot stuff, I think it's interesting that Hillary Clinton is going out there campaigning for these Senate candidates. You know, over 33% of the people supporting Hillary Clinton are doing it while holding their nose. Having a check and balance on Hillary Clinton down ballot is something that a lot of these voters are going to want. So by going out there and linking herself to some of these Democratic Senate candidates, it may backfire on them.
Well, when you look at the favorability ratings, it may be fair to say that on both sides of the aisle we have people holding their noses. I do want to ask you one more question. You brought up those battleground states. Does he have a ground game to close that gap? We're only seeing 16 days left.
Well, you know, I think that's the big question. That's very difficult to assess 2 weeks out. I think we know what the Clinton machine is going to do. They're going to have a ground game. They're a traditional campaign. They have the aid of the DNC. We know that. I think that's the big unknown in this race. Are Donald Trump voters going to show up? Does he have the ground game? Because if he has the ground game, that could make the difference in a 1-point, 2-point race. If he doesn't, you know, he could end up on the losing end of some close races in the battleground states.
I'm getting the time cue. Mark, if you can respond in 15 seconds.
Just real quick, I was out canvassing for Hillary yesterday in Virginia. Definitely the grand game matters, and I encourage all Democrats to help out.
All right, wish we had more time. Mark and Ian, thank you so much. Really interesting. 16 days left.
Thank you.
Thanks.
More than 5.5 million Americans have already cast their ballot through early, absentee, or even mail-in ballots. The Associated Press reports early voting is underway right now in 34 states and here in the District of Columbia. New Mexico and Nevada are the latest to begin launching early voting on Saturday, leading to big crowds and long lines. Check out this video from Henderson, Nevada.
I voted for John F. Kennedy, so that tells you how many years I've been voting. We knew the lines would be long, but we were just very anxious to cast our votes.
Candidates are so controversial, and I think that you have to get out here and vote early and make an example of.
There was a line once about voting early and often. In Nevada, Hillary Clinton up 4.2% in the latest Real Clear Politics average. You can vote early there until November 4th. And the biggest battleground state of them all, Florida, beginning early voting in some counties tomorrow. All counties will be open for early voting by next Saturday. Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump are blanketing the state. Trump visiting Naples, St. Augustine, Tampa, Sanford near Orlando, and Tallahassee between today and Tuesday. Hillary Clinton arriving there Tuesday for a Get Out the Vote event in Coconut Creek, and another rally in the Sunshine State on Thursday. By the end of the week, most voters will be able to cast their ballots, as you can see, in all but just a handful of states. Liz?
And more than 27,000 voters in another battleground state got an extended chance to register for the election. This is in Virginia, courtesy of a federal judge. There was such a high demand to apply online, it caused glitches in the website. A voting rights group sued to extend the registration period until midnight on Friday, and they won. Both the DNC and the RNC supported the extension.
Rich Edson reporting earlier in the show that Hillary Clinton is turning her stump speech attacks towards congressional Republicans in these final days. We heard it yesterday in Pittsburgh, where she slammed Republican Senator Pat Toomey. For a look at the balance of power in the House and the Senate, Chris Stirewalt, Fox News digital politics editor, host of Perino and Stirewalt, I'll Tell You What, and many other things too numerous to name.
So numerous.
So numerous, and so none. I was thinking about as you're getting ready for your show today, Chris, you guys aren't going to have anything at all to talk about.
I know, it's been such a boring election. There's just never any new data. There's never any trend stories. It's just blah, blah, blah. Oh, wait a minute. It's as I like to say, Leland, I do not believe that I have led a life virtuous enough to get to cover an election this insane.
And I think you have said that once or twice before. As we break down, we'll start with the data that we have that's new. And not only do we have the new polling numbers, but we also have some of these early voting numbers in places like Nevada, places like Ohio, all those kinds of states. Tell us, how is that matching up with the polls? Are we seeing the same things tracking, or is this big divergence happening?
So certainly Republicans can be cheered that they're doing about as well, or sometimes a little bit better in the early voting that they did in 2012. But by and large, what the numbers tell us is that Democrats are a lot more engaged in the early going, even more than they usually are. Normally, early voting favors Democrats a bit. This time it seems to be stouter, especially when we look at key battleground states like North Carolina and elsewhere.
Last question for you. We've seen this shift now, about 16 days from the election, of Clinton and the Democrats pulling money a little bit out of the presidential race and putting it towards some of these down ballot races. Think of the Senate race in Arizona, also, of course, the Senate race in Missouri they're putting money into, and those kinds of things. Do you run the risk of not sprinting all the way into the end zone here? Is there a chance they're being a little too confident?
Well, both sides are making a calculated risk. On the Democratic side, they're shifting their focus down ballot in hopes that Hillary Clinton's lead materializes as a presidential win, and that they can have either a closer to tied House and maybe potentially a Democratic Senate, but both chambers of the Congress close to a tie that would give her significant advantages going in. But you're right, there are risks attendant to that. On the Republican side, they're taking a risk with Donald Trump. They're saying we can reinflate him. We can get his numbers back up. We can help him. If we stick together, we can somehow help him get closer and prevent a down ballot catastrophe. So Clinton is shifting her focus off the president, or the Democrats are shifting their focus off the presidential to the down ballot. The Republicans are trying to double down on Trump and see if they can prevent that from turning into a capsize for her.
Yeah, using some of the resources like Rob Portman's resources there in Ohio. Chris Stirewalt will opine on this and so much more of his virtuous life 5 p.m. Eastern for a brand new Prino and Steyerwalt. They will tell you what. Thanks, Chris.
Bye.
This is a Fox News alert. Back to our top story. The Riverside County, California coroner says at least 13 people have been killed in a horrific tour bus crash with a tractor trailer on a highway in Southern California. Our own Anita Vogel is live from our West Coast newsroom with the very latest. Hi, Anita.
Well, hi there, Elizabeth. We're still collecting all the details here, but a tragic accident early this morning on one of California's most traveled freeways, Interstate 10. We are getting reports of at least 13 people dead at this point, possibly more. It all happened when a tour bus and a big rig collided on westbound Interstate 10 near Palm Springs this morning, early this morning. That's a little over 100 miles east of Los Angeles, about a 2-hour drive. We're told the bus smashed into the big rig's trailer. At least 21 bus passengers have been taken to Palm Springs area hospitals. Amazingly, the big rig driver was not hurt. Now, firefighters had to use ladders to climb into the bus's windows to pull the victims out. A tow truck will pull the big rig from the bus to help in that effort as well. We're not sure exactly what caused the bus to slam into the trailer at this point. It's still under investigation. We know the bus was carrying about 30 people. It regularly transports people from Los Angeles to casinos near the Palm Springs area. There are many of them out there. Right now, all westbound lanes of I-10 are closed, so if you were planning to head in that direction this morning, you might want to pick another day. At this point, the big concern is that death toll and how quickly it could rise this morning. Right now, again, it's at 13, but you never know with these kinds of accidents. It could rise throughout the day, and we'll certainly keep you updated. Elizabeth, back to you.
And Anita, forgive me if you answered this. They're still searching at the crime scene, correct?
There are. From what I understand, there are still emergency vehicles at this crash. They want to make sure that they don't leave anybody injured and that they're able to collect everybody to take them to the hospital.
All right, Anita, keep us posted. Thank you so much for updating us on that very sad story.
After the break, pictures coming in from Mosul, Iraq, as the Secretary of Defense touches down there to get a closer look at the battlefield as Iraqi forces backed by the United States launch a new offensive in the fight for Mosul. Plus, all 3 debates are in the books. Donald Trump is making his final pitch to voters as he lags in nationwide polls. Ahead, we're going to take a look at how Trump can motivate his supporters to go to the polls and win over those who are still undecided.
We will make America wealthy again. We will make America strong again. We will make America safe again. And we will make America great again. Thank you, everybody. I love you. God bless you. God bless you. November 8th.
International news for you. Defense Secretary Ash Carter arriving in Erbil, Iraq today after spending yesterday in Baghdad. Carter is now getting an even closer look at the fight to take over Mosul from the Islamic State. Meanwhile, Kurdish forces are asserting control, launching an early morning offensive on a town nearby. Our own Connor Powell is live from our Middle East Bureau with the very latest on the Secretary's visit and the fight for Mosul.
Yeah, Elizabeth, Secretary Carter arrived in Iraq yesterday, meeting with Iraqi officials and Kurdish officials in the last 48 hours or so to get a good view of just sort of how this operation is unfolding and what we've seen for the last week or so.
It's our communication with Connor Powell. Of course, we will continue to get that back, and we will bring you the latest. In the meantime, I will toss it over to my colleague, Leland.
And thankfully, amazing how this works sometimes in television. It actually works out. We have Tom Rogan, National Review columnist and Opportunity Lives columnist, for a little bit of perspective on the fight against ISIS. As we've seen, this is going to be a long slog. You got the Iraq.
Certainly, I think the Kurds are that frontal. If you look at the map of the retaking Mosul, it's clear the Kurds are coming sort of north and from the east, and then the Iraqi army is coming from the south. The critical issue, though, is the other players. What are the Turks doing? They're in northern Iraq. They're concerned about some of the Kurdish movements because at the same time, what are the Russians doing? What are the Syrians doing in terms of that dimension that reflects onto Iraq?
You know, for so long it has been almost impossible to get an articulated and defined Middle East strategy from this administration. They seem to have one idea about Syria, another idea about Iraq, another idea about Iran. Does Mosul allow them to kind of take the spotlight off the disorganization and focus on this sort of very micro-tactical moment? And for that matter, is it that important?
I think that's a very good point. I think, yes, there is this absence of grand strategy, as it might be called. And certainly, and you see this in the administration's real singular focus and public relations to do with Mosul. I do think Mosul is important for a couple of reasons. One of the few Iraqi cities that has this traditional, even through prior to Saddam Hussein's rule, but certainly in Saddam Hussein's rule, notion of Kurds, Shia, Sunni, Christians, all being able to live in harmony. And so it's a template, potentially, if it could be retaken, if the Kurds don't try and take territory, if the Shia militias don't disrupt the Sunni population there, it potentially gives that opportunity for Iraq to say we can come together.
I don't think you want to go to Vegas and put a bet on all that happening.
No.
You might get a good line on it, but I'm not sure you want to place that bet.
Who dares wins? Sometimes it works, you know.
Yeah, sometimes. Although the Middle East winning that strategy is not exactly proven over time to be all that effective. Speaking of that, though, and you brought up the interesting point of the Shia militia. If all of a sudden American forces help the Kurds and help the Iraqis take back Mosul, you put Mosul back into Iraq, if you will, and give it back to the Baghdad government. Isn't that essentially just giving it to the Iranians?
It depends. It depends. Prime Minister Abadi, who Secretary Ash Carter was meeting with, and you just saw your viewers saw in the tape there, is a good prime minister. He's challenging the Iranians. The problem is the US, President Obama, doesn't want to challenge the Iranians in support of Abadi as much as he could because of the Iran deal. So there is that weakness there. But the big question becomes, when Mosul is retaken, what Iraqi units are positioned there, and to what degree does Abadi now say to the Shia militias, who he's been pushing back against, listen, we're going to take you on. And at some point there will be a crunch, because the Iranians want to seize Iraqi democracy under their banner of rule.
Well, the Iranians and the Iraqis fought a long war over whether they would be seized, a long and bloody war in which the U.S. backed the Iraqis, but it kind of came to a stalemate. As we look forward to this, the Iranians are a lot stronger than they used to be, and this is all part of their grand strategy here. They want to be able to have that crescent from Iran all the way through Iraq and then into Syria. Is there anything effectively that's going to stop them, save a couple of hundred U.S. Special Forces troops who've been told don't get into combat?
Well, one of the positive things in Iraqi, and people sometimes don't pay enough attention to this, in Iraqi Shia politics and more theocracy, in Najaf, for example, there's a Ayatollah, Grand Ayatollah Sistani, who is actually a much more nationalist. He's an Iraqi Shia nationalist versus the Iranian theological school. So there is a unique Shia dimension to Iraq that people like Abadi potentially with time could build up. But it really requires the United States being willing to say to the Iranians, and they play their little games with the boats and whacking politicians in Beirut, Baghdad, to challenge them in aggressive ways that as we did.
I don't think you'd want to put a bet on that in Vegas either. The idea of this administration challenging the Iraqis, next administration possibly.
Yeah, but they will have to, because the only reason this administration hasn't done it is because they are desperate to have the legacy Iran deal, and they're scared of the Iranians essentially. But the way to deal with the Iranians is to have some kind of realpolitik understanding, but for them to know that you're going to kill them or coerce them at certain points and deal with them at the same time. It's tea, but maybe like a Russian tea, right? It may be polonium laced. So it's a nice little...
All right, yeah. Well, if that foreshadows anything, we'll have you back to talk about it. Tom Rogan stepping in, playing the role of both Connor Powell and Tom Rogan today. Double duty, we won't pay you any extra.
No.
Thanks, buddy. Elizabeth?
All right, coming up after the break, they're in the final stretch of their campaigns. But with Trump behind in the polls, does he still have a path to victory? We're going to take a look at the electoral map after the break.
A Fox News alert as we continue to cover the sad story out of near Palm Springs, California. At least 13 people dead in a tour bus crash there. That's according to the Riverside County Coroner's Office. And out of that bus, at least 30 people are injured there at area hospitals. 5 of them right now, we are told, are in critical condition. California Highway Patrol says the bus collided with a tractor trailer on Interstate 10 in Desert Hot Springs. That's a picture of Hillary Clinton, not of the bus. We're going to work to get the bus pictures back. On the scene right now, they are searching for possibly even more victims there just east, that is, of Los Angeles. All westbound lanes of I-10 are closed. We have some crews continuing to work this story, bringing the very latest as we get it from our Los Angeles bureau.
Thank you. It's my privilege to be here in Gettysburg, hallowed ground where so many lives were given in service to freedom.
All right, Clinton and Trump, they are dueling for interviews on Fox News Sunday this morning with a little more than 2 weeks until Election Day. Millions of Americans already voting. Every major national poll shows Trump with little hope for an election night victory. But his campaign remains focused on traditional swing states. The Clinton organization is expanding to some not-so-traditional swing states. Jim Osman is the Media General D.C. Bureau Chief, and he joins me now to take a look at some of the shifting demographics across the country. You've been doing this for a long time, Jim, and I say that very respectfully. There's a couple states that we've been talking about. You and I, Arizona, Georgia, right, Utah, even Texas. These are states that were never even up for discussion. And it's not even necessarily that they're up for discussion, it's that the margins are getting smaller and smaller, and they could be up for discussion in 16 days.
Well, if you look at Arizona, for example, I mean, there are two reasons why in Arizona. The Latino population is getting larger. They're enrolling more younger Latino voters. But if you also think about it, there's a large Mormon population in Mesa, which is outside of Phoenix, and those voters haven't been all that thrilled with Donald Trump. And so those are the two reasons in Arizona. In Texas, I mean, it's the same thing with the Latino voter population. I think in Georgia, the African-American population has gotten bigger.
What about the college-educated white vote?
Well, I mean, I think that...
Different story?
In this election, let's say, I think that, and this gets to a point we'll make later, is that there are some folks that may have voted for Mitt Romney or may have voted for John McCain who are not all that with Donald Trump and in 4 years may vote for the Republican nominee again.
Okay, so that sort of brings us to the silent majority. Right. We've been seeing that all over headlines, that Donald Trump's campaign is saying, listen, they're not getting polled, but they're going to show up, and we're going to win this just because you're not predicting it, we're going to win it. Is there any substance to that?
Well, I'll give you an anecdotal example, which is a woman that I know in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia. I'd asked her to set up a voter panel for us to get some women together, women for Clinton, women for Trump, and she got back to me and said, well, I have 8 women, 4 for Clinton, 4 for Trump. The problem is that the 4 women for Trump don't want to go on camera. And I said, why? And she said to me, she said, well, they're afraid of blowback, pushback from their friends in the community. So I think that there may be something to that. However, at the end of campaigns, the Republicans may be getting a case of wishful thinking.
Right.
You know, I mean, people say, oh, we've got this one poll that shows we're winning and the other 30 don't.
Right.
I mean, I think there's some of that as well.
You talked about Pennsylvania. I want to pop up your electoral map prediction so our viewers can take a look. It's safe to say that your electoral map prediction has changed. And I think this is the Fox News one, but this is yours right here.
Correct.
When I first looked at this, as we've had you on the show before, I was surprised that there was such a discrepancy in these numbers.
Well,
what's changed?
If you look at the map, well, I think a lot has changed. The tapes that we saw from Access Hollywood, I think the bottom has kind of fallen out. Listen, on that map I have Missouri, and I think there are probably a lot of eyebrows raised on that one. That may be an outlier, but I think Arizona, for sure, I think that's probably going to tip. Georgia's going to tip. Listen, folks like to go with the winner, and in this election, I think that states are starting to tip in that direction. I think around, that map has about 380 electoral votes. That may be a little bit on the outside of it. It might be, I think, closer to 350.
Because you have North Carolina, you have Florida, and you have Georgia. Those surprised me because, if I'm not mistaken, in your last map they weren't. They were red.
Well, in the last map that we had, when I paid a visit in September, it was largely a map that, you know, the path that Donald Trump could get, and it was a very narrow one, and that lane closed, and then it started really open for Hillary Clinton. So that's really what happened. It's just that he had some possibilities around Labor Day that just don't exist.
Got it. Well, Jim, I think we're going to have you back hopefully before the election because it's very interesting, and we'll see how the electoral votes actually pan out.
Good to see you.
Thank you so much for joining us. Really interesting. Leland?
More on the election coming up right after this show. Another chance to see Mr. Sunday himself, fresh off the debate stage. Chris Wallace interviews both campaign managers, Kellyanne Conway and Robbie Mook. Heard from each of them earlier in the show. 2 p.m. Eastern here on Fox. And Fox News Channel is your election headquarters for now through the election, with special live coverage all day Tuesday, November 8th. After more than 7 decades, one of baseball's most storied franchises is celebrating unquestionably a historic win. Matt Finn through the very difficult assignment of being outside Wrigley Field this afternoon.
Good afternoon, Leland. Well, this is the moment Cubs fans have waited for. There's so much energy out here right now. It feels like today is the game day. And coming up, we're going to talk to 2 diehard fans who were in the stadium during that historic win last night.